Nissan X-Trail T32 having got acquainted with the motor line closer, it becomes clear that the resource and reliability of the motor will remain without question, and all because the engines are practically the same as those used for the previous Cunning. Let's take a 2-liter MR20DD. What makes it different from the former MR20DD? Only phase regulators and direct injection, which disperse the horses to 144 forces. And that's it. Otherwise, the MR20DD is a familiar reliable chain unit that is capable of driving 300,000 kilometers without a hitch, provided that consumables are replaced in a timely manner. However, there were a couple of negative points. The motor will have to be periodically inspected for oil leaks, especially the sump and engine front cover. Almost every owner of an X-Trail with 2.0 faces similar snot at different periods of operation. The problem is solved logically simply by sealing, that is, by gluing the connector of the leaked element. Inexpensive and efficient. The second problem arose due to the desire of Nissan to catch up with competitors in terms of performance by adding direct injection. Horses may have increased, but not as much as extra hemorrhoids. The increased demands on fuel quality, as expected, has led to the fact that owners who are not particularly puzzled by the choice of refueling are faced with a loss of traction and an increase in gasoline consumption. Thus, the nozzles of the nozzles are clogged and coked, because of which they will have to be removed, washed, and rejoiced at the added 3 horsepower further. On the used trail market, the 2.5-liter QR25DE unit is valued above all. This is probably how it should be, because he took his place under the hood of the T32 without undergoing any changes. Naturally, the resource, at least not decreased. Moreover, problems with nozzles, like those of a younger unit, are not disturbed, and indeed there are practically no weak points here, if you do not take into account the same oil leaks of the sump and the front cover of the engine. A sort of small oil stain on an almost flawless reputation. I like Renashni diesels, simple, unpretentious, resourceful. The 1.6 motor named a 9M would not be an exception if it were not for the desire to save milliliters using the start-stop system. All old-school car enthusiasts are aware of why a turbo timer is needed and what stopping a turbocharged engine without a minute of downtime at idle can result in. What was warned about is happening. The average life of the turbine was about 150 TKM, despite the fact that some of the boost did not even reach 100 TKM. Overheating and coking of the supercharger channels do their job. There was no lack of irony. One of the electronics engineers accidentally or deliberately created a saboteur, which turns on, no matter how strange it may sound, a useful malfunction. Simply put, in the electrics of the X-Trail T32, there are cases of failure of the start-stop system due to a breakdown of the control relay. And if I were you, I wouldn't do anything about it. Alternatively, you can fix the relay so that no errors are lit, but it is better to turn off the engine shutdown function in a traffic jam. It won't save you anything. The classic automatic on the X-Trail is no longer to be found. A diesel engine can only be found with a reliable and unpretentious mechanical gearbox, and for gasoline units, a variator was expectedly provided, but not the old familiar JF011E, but the freshly baked JF016E of the CVT 8 generation. The driving performance of such a box was positively assessed by the owners. Not every layman will be able to distinguish this variator from the traditional automatic. True, if we talk about weaknesses and resources, then here the impression is already ambiguous. On the one hand, the number of marriages according to reviews has decreased by an order of magnitude. There are, of course, cases of premature wear, but it is impossible to call them general. There is no reason. On the other hand, the overall resource has slightly decreased. The former JF011E on the previous X-Trail, with proper care, could go 250 TKM, JF016E under the hood of the T32 and does not always reach 200,000. The most important thing is that when the first jerks appear during acceleration, do not delay with diagnostics and repairs, otherwise cones, an oil pump, a valve body and other components may be added to the replacement of a worn lamellar belt. Even better, if at 150,000, as a preventive measure, change the belt even in the absence of signs of wear. In the context of the next 100,000 kilometers, this approach will only save money. Sometimes it is worth looking at the junction of the engine with the variator. There are cases of leakage of the gearbox oil seal, and this is fraught with premature release of lubricant and you yourself understand what else. About the periodic oil change in the variator, I think it's not worth talking about. This is the main rule of longevity. As an auto picker, I was also embarrassed by the loss of the oil dipstick box from the design. It used to be clearer. It was possible to approximately estimate the quality of care for the variator by the color smell of the lubricant and the presence of chips, but now when buying a used car, you will have to rely only on an external examination, computer data, and subjective feelings during a test drive. CVT is already unpredictable, and here we have taken away one more verification factor. It's a shame. With all-wheel drive, the Nissan X-Trail had no particular problems anyway, and the T32 had nothing to please us with, because the electromagnetic clutch and the rear axle drive remained the same, only the control unit is different, tied to the ESP system. If anything happens to the rear-wheel drive line, it's the wear of the driveshaft crosspieces, especially for those who like to dive into a puddle along a forest road. And the rest without remarks and problems. There were also no revolutions in the chassis of the new X-Trail. The Japanese do not like to spoil what works anyway. From that, the weaknesses are similar to those that have already been known a long time ago. One of these is the silent blocks of the front subframe and levers. By 100 TkM, all this rubber technical lads are usually completely replaced or already require urgent rotation. The wheel bearings spin around the same amount and the stabilizer struts loom. No matter how strange it may sound, running gear failures are the least of the concerns for Nissan X-Trail owners. But squeaks. It's a problem with squeaks. No sound occurs only when driving in a straight line. Over time, bumpers of the front shock absorbers begin to creak on bumps, and in turns, the boot of the steering shaft squeaks at the exit to the engine compartment. If at the height of the disease you simultaneously drive through the pits and turn, then, as the users themselves say, you can shoot yourself, shame on the whole yard. From a technical point of view, nothing bad happens, but it undermines the psyche specifically. You have to lubricate once a month or change the rubber bands for new ones. But in the rear multi-link, peace and quiet for at least 200,000 kilometers. Also, as in the case of squeaks, it will be difficult to find the owner of the X-Trail T32, who was not taken by surprise by electrical problems due to a broken contact in one of the several CAN bus connectors. Anything can stop working: multimedia, climate system, the engine may stall, or the electric power steering may fail at the most interesting moment. There are many surprises. There is only one solution: soldering the entire CAN bus backbone to the problem area. If the Euro does not work in the first minutes after starting the car, then most likely the battery turned out to be a weak point, which, according to the owners, rarely performs its duties for more than 3 years, especially in close cooperation with the ill-fated start-stop system. Otherwise, the electrics of the Nissan X-Trail T32 resembles a typical Japanese. Everything always turns on and works flawlessly. The mileage of X-Trail does not record anywhere, except for the dashboard. That is, neither active nor hidden duplicates of mileage in blocks can be found even with a Consult 3 dealer scanner. It remains only to subjectively discuss and argue about the reliability of the path traveled, that is, to guess on the service book, on the basis of 2. And, of course, on the wear of the car itself. On versions with a variator, you can find out the hours. With due experience, this can be done with a small margin of error, but it is only worth considering the entire budget of the materials. For example, the driver's seat is pressed through by 100,000 kilometers, the foam rubber begins to crumble, and the lateral support ceases to perform its functions. The steering wheel is also not from the skin of a young lamb, it is overwritten by 50,000. The plastic on the center console and instrument panel shuffles. In general, everything is like the price competitor Toyota RAV4. Body and paint X-Trail to match the interior decoration. In general, not bad, but there are a couple of 3 flaws that may need to be put in order. For example, a regular windshield is terribly afraid of pebbles. Even the smallest ones it cracks, so even small chips are better to give for repair. The second weak point settled very close to the lobovka, and the people this plastic duster is called jabot. So, this jabot does not like to sit in a lap with glass. Over time it even begins to warp until it is forcibly glued. The same can be said about chrome coatings in relation to plastic. Solid rejections. As for corrosion, the past well-known misfortune, as with the old Nissans, will not happen here, but saffron milk mushrooms, oddly enough, can still appear. Basically, rust actively covers the entire exhaust pipeline and gradually pecks through chips on the front body pillars and trunk lid. Nothing of the kind has yet been recorded in other places. Yes, the T32 has become more dynamic and comfortable and, as a result, more difficult in terms of technical and electrical parts. The bar for fuel quality requirements has risen. However, to call the cunning of this generation loose brittle language does not turn around. Still, most owners listen to squeaks, solder the CAN bus, but otherwise do not know the problems. Before you decide to buy a version on a CVT with a mileage of more than 100,000 kilometers, you need to consider that the unknown residual resource of the box will disturb and interfere with sleep, especially if the budget does not include thousands of rubles, so 70 for possible repairs. Who knows who and how travel to you? However, the service book cannot serve as a guarantee of accuracy. Therefore, the best choice among the Nissan X-Trail on the secondary will be a version with a 2.5 engine on a CVT and a mileage of up to 70 km. In practice, there were also options for choosing a car after major accidents and with twisted mileage, but there weren't any technically killed. Here, of course, you can't say for sure whether the main audience of this model is as calm and tidy as Volvo lovers, or the car like the 105th Cruiser is strong and is not afraid of anything. No matter. It is important that in the used car market you can find a reliable mid-sized Nissan X-Trail T32 crossover at a good price, and it will be quite easy to do this due to the relatively small demand for the second hand.